At my mother-in-law's grand birthday dinner in Rome, where every detail screamed opulence, every plate shimmered with refinement, and every guest was dressed like they're stepping onto the pages of Vogue Italia, there was no chair for me. Oops, Sean chuckled, his voice too light for what it meant. Guess we miscounted. The table burst into polite laughter. Even Eleanor, my mother-in-law, gave a smug little sip from her wine glass, her diamond ring catching the candlelight just right. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I simply stood and said, "Seems I'm not family," and turned around. That sentence hung in the air like fog rolling off the Tiber. It silenced the room more effectively than any toast could. I walked out of that exclusive Roman restaurant, my heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor, heart pounding like an earthquake in my chest, but my voice had been steady. And I would not let them see me shake. Outside, the air smelled of roses and diesel, that familiar contradiction that only Rome can offer. I pulled out my phone and opened the app I'd spent the last decade building my business around. 30 minutes. That's all I had before they'd realize what I was doing. And 30 minutes was more than enough. 5 years earlier, I was just Anna Morgan, founder of Elite Affairs, Boston's most sought-after event planning company. I built it from nothing: late nights, student loans, coffee-fueled strategy sessions, and relentless networking. Every elegant gala, corporate retreat, and society wedding bore my invisible fingerprints. That's how I met Sean Caldwell, at a charity gala for the Boston Children's Hospital. He was tall, with easy charm, the kind that came from never needing to worry about rent or resumes. He strolled over to me, holding a glass of champagne like he was born with it. "So you're the wizard behind all this?" he asked, gesturing at the transformed ballroom. "My mother's been looking for someone to plan her next event. I think we just found her answer." One job led to another, and soon, I was the unofficial planner of every Caldwell affair. Our romance started 6 months later, and it felt real. Despite the warning signs, the tight smiles from his mother Eleanor, the raised brows from Boston's social elite when they realized who he was dating, I told myself he was different. He loved my ambition. He saw me. When he proposed, 11 months after our first date, I said yes. But even then, I had a nagging sense I was saying yes to more than just love. I was stepping into a world that would never truly see me as one of their own. Eleanor's smile at our first family dinner was laced with syrupy condescension. "Cellmate success is so American," she had said, her lips barely moving, her eyes scanning my dress. Still, I pushed those doubts aside. I believed I could win them over. That love was enough. Our wedding was the social event of the season, featured in Boston Magazine, covered by local society pages. I planned it myself. I couldn't trust anyone else with something that important. Eleanor had opinions about everything. The venue wasn't traditional enough. The guest list lacked legacy names. The menu was too adventurous. I compromised when I could and stood firm where it mattered. Sean played the diplomat, but I noticed he never contradicted her outright. After the wedding, the undermining became more subtle, more corrosive. They continued using my company for events, but always questioned my decisions, changed plans without notice, and took credit when things went well. At family dinners, I was praised for my talents, then excluded from the conversations that mattered. And then came Eleanor's birthday in Rome. A dinner for 12. A lavish affair. I had helped coordinate the whole thing from Boston, even though I wasn't consulted on the final details. I arrived in a silk gown I'd spent weeks finding, only to discover my seat at the table was missing. Literally. No place card. No chair. "Oops," Sean had said. "Guess we miscounted." 12 people laughed. 12 people didn't notice, or didn't care, that I was standing there with no place to belong. But I did. I belonged to myself. As I walked away, I tapped into my event management app, the one I'd built from scratch, the one that gave me control over every contract, every payment, every cancellation clause. Venue? Cancelled. Catering? Cancelled. Musicians, lighting, floral arrangements? All gone, with polite but firm messages from my office, citing unforeseen family conflict. By the time they realized, I was already sipping espresso at a cafe across the piazza, watching through the window as panic bloomed across their perfectly powdered faces. Sean came stumbling out 20 minutes later, his phone to his ear. I answered calmly. "Seems I'm not family," I said again. "So I assumed it wasn't my place to host your family's event." I didn't go back to the hotel I shared with Sean. I booked my own suite. Booked a new flight. I left Rome with nothing but a carry-on and my name, Anna Morgan Caldwell, though I would drop the last part within the month. I went back to Boston and rebuilt my life. Elite affairs had always been mine. Now, so was my voice. I wrote my story, gave talks about women in business, and found community among those who had felt invisible too. If you've ever been excluded from a table you helped set, if you've ever felt like love came with conditions, know this. Your worth is not determined by where you sit. It's determined by how you rise when they try to keep you standing. And I rose. Alone. Proud. Uninvited, but undeniable. At family gatherings, I was expected to smile, to be gracious, to stay in my lane. My professional experience, the empire I had built, was treated like a hobby. "Anna has such a good eye for these things," Eleanor would say, patting my hand like I was a precocious child showing off a school project. "It's almost like having a personal party planner in the family." They constantly questioned my decisions, changed plans at the last minute, and took credit when things went well. My ideas were solicited, then dismissed. My name was rarely mentioned in toasts or speeches, unless it was as Sean's wife, never as Anna Morgan Caldwell, founder of Elite Affairs. And Sean, he never defended me. "That's just how my mother is," he'd say with a shrug. "Don't take it personally." But it was personal. And it only got worse. Planning Eleanor's 70th birthday in Rome should have been a crowning achievement, a week-long celebration ending in a private dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the Colosseum. A fairy tale finale in the Eternal City. I poured everything into it. My passion. My skill. My reputation. I called in favors, used my highest-level industry contacts, and ensured every detail was perfect. Then came the red flags. Vendors called about missed deposits. Payments were late. When I asked Sean, he waved it off, just the accountant being cautious with international transfers. But one night, I saw his laptop left open. I hadn't meant to snoop. But the numbers were undeniable. Maxed out credit lines. Properties mortgaged. Investments tanking. The Caldwell fortune was unraveling. Still, I kept planning. I even used my company's credit line to cover costs. I told myself it was temporary. That Sean would explain, once the party was over. That we'd figure it out together. Then came the final blow. The morning of our flight to Rome, Sean was in the shower when his phone buzzed. I never checked his phone. Never once in our 5 years together. But something in my chest whispered, "Look." The screen lit up with a message preview. "V, can't wait to see you in Rome. Have you told her yet?" My breath stopped. I opened the message thread. Vanessa Hughes, his college girlfriend. The woman his parents had always wanted him to marry. The woman they still invited to family events when I wasn't around. The thread was long, full of late-night confessions, plans for the future. And a baby, their baby, due in 4 months. My fingers moved on their own. Screenshots. Forwarded to myself. Evidence erased. Not for him, no. For me. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I closed the app, wiped my face, and smiled in the mirror. Then I boarded the plane to Rome, sitting beside the man who had betrayed me, heading toward the family that had never seen me as one of their own. The plane touched down at Fiumicino just as the sun kissed the Roman skyline in gold. I had arranged everything: private Mercedes vans, welcome champagne, curated itineraries. It should have impressed them. Instead, Eleanor's first words stepping off the plane were, "I thought I specified the hotel cars, Anna. These seem rather generic." I bit my tongue. "They're from Lux Transport," I explained. "They service most of the diplomats in Rome." But she was already whispering with Richard, heads bent like conspirators. At Hotel de Russi, 5-star hospitality awaited us. I'd spent months securing perfect suites, arranging personalized welcome baskets, even sourcing Sean's favorite Barolo. Eleanor barely glanced at her itinerary. "We'll just play it by ear," she said, waving off my weeks of planning. The family knows Rome quite well. Our suite was stunning. A terrace overlooking the Spanish Steps. Fresh flowers. Handwritten notes. Then Sean's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call. "Work?" I asked when he came back. "Just some investment issues," he said, eyes avoiding mine. "Let's get ready for dinner." That night, at the charming trattoria in Trastevere I had carefully selected, the first cracks became chasms. Just before we arrived, the seating arrangement changed. Somehow, I found myself at the far end of the long table. Far from Sean. Far from his family. Far from anyone who might ask me about the evening I had so lovingly planned. Eleanor was seated at the head, flanked by her preferred guests. Vanessa had not yet arrived in Rome, but her ghost sat closer to my husband than I ever could. I stared at my untouched glass of wine, the din of laughter washing over me like static. I had never felt so invisible. So other. But inside me, something solidified. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. The seating arrangement had shifted, they said. I found myself exiled to the far end of the table, boxed in between Sean's cousin and a great-aunt who spent the meal comparing me unfavorably to Vanessa. Across the table, laughter erupted from Eleanor's end, inside jokes, references to previous family trips to Italy. Trips I hadn't been invited to. When I tried to join the conversation, tentatively offering ideas for the next day's activities, Melissa cut in with practiced sweetness. "Oh, Anna, we've actually decided to do some family shopping tomorrow instead of the Vatican tour." "Family shopping?" I echoed. Eleanor leaned in, her voice silk-wrapped steel. "Just a little tradition, dear. You'd be bored. Why not use the time to check on the birthday arrangements? That's your expertise, after all." There it was. Excluded. Again. Professionally useful. Personally invisible. The pattern became unbearable in its consistency. Each morning, I would wake to find Sean already gone, nothing more than a scribbled note about breakfast with his father. Each afternoon, the family vanished on unannounced excursions. Each evening, whispered conversations ended abruptly when I entered the lobby. Dinner reservations were adjusted to include surprise guests, old family friends who looked at me with veiled pity. I felt their eyes scanning my face for cracks, watching for the moment I'd break. They knew. Everyone but me had been rehearsing for a performance I hadn't auditioned for. On the third morning, Sean left in a rush, forgetting his briefcase. It sat there, unlatched. Waiting. I opened it. Inside, draft separation papers prepared by the Caldwell family attorney. Dated 2 months ago. A proposed settlement that was insulting, a sliver of what I was legally owed. And worst of all, a script. A literal script outlining how Sean would announce our divorce at Eleanor's birthday dinner, presenting it as a mutual decision made with respect and love. My hands trembled as I photographed each page. It was all there. Their orchestrated exit, wrapped in civility, timed for public spectacle. Eleanor's birthday wasn't a party. It was my funeral as a Caldwell. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I documented. Each day, I returned to our suite alone under the guise of wedding prep, hunting for more evidence. I found bank statements showing massive withdrawals to offshore accounts, email printouts detailing liquidation plans before the situation becomes public, a handwritten note from Eleanor to Sean. Once this unpleasantness with Anna is behind us, Vanessa will be welcomed back properly. Still, I wore the mask. I approved floral arrangements, confirmed menu selections, smiled at guests. When they asked why I seemed tired, I said, last-minute details. What I didn't say, I'm preparing for war. The morning of Eleanor's birthday dawned cloudless and warm. I rose early, careful not to wake Sean, and slipped into the hotel's business center to finalize the evening's confirmations. And then her voice. Eleanor. On the other side of the concierge desk, there will be 12 seats. Not 13, she instructed curtly. I don't care what the original reservation says. The seating chart I sent is final. A pause. No, that won't be a problem. The arrangement has been discussed with my son. His wife will not be staying for the dinner. A family matter, you understand. No need for questions when she leaves. When she leaves. Not if. When. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't a mistake. It was the final act of their carefully choreographed humiliation. They wanted me to walk away, publicly, silently, on their terms. But I had built an empire around timing, logistics, and control. If they wanted a dramatic exit, I would give them one. Just not the version they'd rehearsed. I left the business center calmly. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and began making a new set of arrangements. The real ones. I arrived at Aroma, the rooftop restaurant overlooking the Coliseum, an hour early as any season planner would. The golden light of sunset bathed the terrace in amber hues. It should have been magical. I inspected every detail. The custom calligraphed place cards. The elegant, candlelit centerpieces. The personalized menus in gold foil with Eleanor's name embossed at the top. Everything was perfect. And then I made the call. To the venue. To the caterer. To the entertainment. To the billing office. To the press, who owed me a favor. 30 minutes later, it would all begin to unravel, beautifully, precisely. And when they arrived expecting a night of legacy and legacy building, they'd be met with something else entirely. The sun was setting as I completed my final walkthrough. White peonies and roses, the ones Eleanor insisted were the only acceptable flowers, were perfectly fluffed in their crystal vases. The champagne chilled in silver buckets. The 7-course tasting menu, reconfirmed. The birthday cake, 3 tiers of Italian craftsmanship and artistry, waited in the kitchen like a finale. Is everything to your satisfaction, Signora Caldwell? Marco, the maitre d', asked. Perfect, I replied, with a smile so composed it could have cut glass. Because it was perfect. Flawless, in fact. The last event I would ever plan for the Caldwells, and I would not let them take my standards from me. Back at the hotel, I changed into the midnight blue Valentino gown I'd purchased for this night, the one I knew Eleanor would admire but never compliment. As I applied my makeup, I met my reflection head-on. 5 years of silent cuts, shifting goalposts, and social strangulation had not broken me. They had tempered me, hardened me. I wasn't here to belong. I was here to finish what they started. We were to meet in the lobby, as a family. I arrived exactly on time. Eleanor, radiant in vintage Chanel, turned her diamond-hard smile on me. Anna, darling, you look lovely. She air-kissed past my cheeks. The car ride was short. Hollow chatter about the vineyard lunch I wasn't invited to. In the elevator, Sean placed a hand on the small of my back. A gesture that once felt like protection. Now it felt like stage direction. The rooftop doors opened. Gasps of admiration. Applause. Eleanor walked ahead, the birthday queen surveying her kingdom. And there it was, the table. One long round curve of elegance. Set for 12. Not 13. I followed behind Sean, scanning the settings. Everyone moved toward their places with unhurried confidence. And then, nothing. No chair. No name card. No space carved out for me. I stood there, suspended in the moment. The conversations carried on, politely avoiding me like I was a waitress who'd wandered too close. Even the waitstaff, who had confirmed this seating plan with me hours before, shifted awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Is something wrong? Eleanor asked, sweet, weaponized innocence in her voice. Loud enough to silence the table. There seems to be a mistake, I said evenly. My place setting is missing. A ripple of falsified concern moved through the room. Melissa leaned over the table, brows furrowed in theatrical confusion. Did someone count wrong? Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps a miscommunication with the restaurant? And then Sean. Chuckling. Actually chuckling. Oops, he said. Guess we miscounted. Soft laughter rose. Warm, rehearsed. The kind people use to make an outsider feel foolish for noticing. In that moment, everything locked into place. The public setting designed to suppress reaction. The Voops just believable enough to avoid blame. The empty chair that wasn't empty at all, it was erased. This was the climax of their narrative. Poor Anna. Couldn't keep up. Couldn't take the pressure. Couldn't handle being a Caldwell. I looked around the table. Eleanor, victorious behind her birthday smile. Richard, uncomfortable but obedient. Melissa and Thomas, feeding on the drama, smirking into their wine glasses. Their spouses, quiet, vaguely ashamed. And Sean, my husband, watching me like a scientist observing an unstable sample. I could have made a scene. I could have demanded a chair, called out their lies, thrown champagne in someone's face. That's what they wanted. That's what Eleanor was counting on. So she could put a hand on Sean's arm, shake her head gently, and say, she's just not well, dear. They expected a meltdown. What they got was a silence so sharp it drew blood.